Thanks for coming. We have a nice crowd as usual. And tonight, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. It's me. Thank you. A man who needs no introduction. I never did anything. Know thyself. Okay, tonight's lecture is called Sfirat Da'at. It is about the Jewish perspective on knowledge. And might as well get right to it. Tonight we'll cover 5 different sections. We'll just start off with an overview of Da'at, and then we're going to look at the textual example of the tree of knowledge of good and bad. We're going to look at liturgical example derived from Rambam's 13 principles of Jewish faith, and it's called Yigdal. Talking about ethics and practice, our examples will come from Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers. Then we're going to go to history, to the Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment, and finally wind up with the celebration of knowledge, Simchat Torah. So as I like to do, I like to outline first. We're going to start out with a Kabbalistic definition, then literal definitions of not only knowledge, but wisdom and insight. And the rabbi and Kathy discussed those two in depth, but I just want to repeat them because I think it's really important to understand the relationship among them. I like this better, I think. So a Kabbalistic definition of Da'at, and as most Kabbalistic definitions go, this one is intricate and long. I think the basic issues are that, according to Kabbalah, Da'at is a central sphera, the sphera in which all of this comes together. You'll notice its placement in the tree of life diagram. And it is born of the, that's a good word, it is born of the passive chachma connecting to, the active chachma connecting to the passive bina. In other words, wisdom and insight result in an archetype of knowledge. And it is through the interaction is only successful if we are sensitive to and recognize the meaningfulness of the ideas created. Da'at is associated with the soul and memory and concentration, and is the mystical state, as I said, where it all comes together. What does all that mean? According to the Kabbalistic definition, knowledge, true knowledge, is an integral function of Chachma and Bina. The world comes into being because God knows it to be, says it to be, and tells it and knows it are viewed as the same thing. So the literal definition of Da'at shouldn't come as a major surprise. It's acquisition of facts, truths, principles, familiarity or conversance with a particular subject area, or the body of truths or body of facts that we sometimes call science. Like science is both a method and a body of knowledge. In this case, knowledge can be a process or a product. So what about wisdom? What is wisdom? It, according to Western definitions in the basic dictionary, it's the ability or the result of ability to use the knowledge you have wisely, with experience, through experience, understanding, compassion, and concern for others. It's the accumulated knowledge, erudition, or enlightenment. That's a more literal definition even. And understanding is the perception of meaning, the grasp of a subject, to be thoroughly familiar with a subject, to assign a meaning to, to to have systematic interpretation or rationale. Okay, so how does this all fit together? A science-based definition, a westernized definition, would say something like this, that wisdom and understanding are based on the accumulation of knowledge, of facts. That is, you make observations. From those observations, you infer relationships, and from those relationships, you build theory. In this case, wisdom and understanding are based on the theoretical, on theory building model. Knowledge, enough knowledge accumulated from the ground up will give you wisdom and understanding. Whereas a Kabbalah-based definition goes the other way. Wisdom, in terms of thinking capability and insight into your own motivations, feelings, etc., desires, influence the transition of belief into knowledge. So it can go both ways from the Jewish perspective. For example, our sages translate knowledge also as consciousness, or for purposes of this lecture, self-awareness. Without da'at, there can't be any accountability or freedom of choice or control of yourself. By 3 years old, the sages say you can learn right from wrong, but it's not until 20 until you establish a mind of your own. And it is the case that, knowledge is easy. Animals know their own rituals. They have instincts, instinctual knowledge of mating and grooming, etc., But only we have self-awareness. Some would argue about whales and porpoises and monkeys, but I don't know about that. But I do know that only we can examine our own motivations. Hence, we're going to use this at, I seem to be pointing at something. What did I do? Oh.
You rubbed along the bottom sensor.
Oh, okay, there we go. The textual example I've chosen is the tree of knowledge of good and bad, and as most ex-government employees do, I made an acronym of it, and our sages do too. The TOKGB. For sources, I'll use Genesis, of course, the Torah rendition. We're going to talk about what happened, what it really means, and how does it apply today. So what happened? We all know the story, I think. God made man and put him in the garden to take care of it. He saw Adam was lonely, so he made a woman. The man and the woman were naive, were only good, and felt no shame because they didn't know what shame was until along came the Satan, the adversary in the form of a snake, and convinced the woman to eat from the TOKGB, and Eve shared the fruit with Adam, and all of a sudden the couple became aware of their nakedness and all of the other issues that were abstract to them at the time. So even, then God said to Adam, who told you to eat from that tree? And the one tree I had forbidden you to eat. And of course, Adam blamed Eve blamed the snake blamed whoever. And as we know, it all rolls downhill when things go bad. So God had consequences. The serpent was condemned to crawl on his belly and eat dust. Women were condemned to have children in pain and to be subservient to their husbands. And to man, he had to work for his sustenance. He had to till the soil, and and just basically, there's no free lunch anymore, whereas there was in the Garden of Eden. So to prevent them from eating the fruit of the tree of life, now that they were knowledgeable about everything, God took them from the garden. That's all we need, is somebody to live forever with all of this difficulty of trying to deal with good and evil. So what does this all mean? Many have referred to the TOKGB as just a tree of knowledge. And that has spurred lots of controversy and questions about, well, did God want people to be stupid? Why didn't he let them eat from the tree of knowledge? Well, that's not exactly what it meant, because it was really, again, that's why I keep stressing this, it's a tree of knowledge of good and bad. So what did that mean? Well, the Nefesh HaChaim, who was living around, I guess, 1750s, 60s, he died in 1821. He said that the original impulses of Adam and Eve were all for the good. They had free will, but their concept of evil was in the abstract. They never dealt with it. They didn't have to deal with it because they just did what was natural, what was good. With free choice, I just said that, but by eating from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, they now incorporated the concepts of good and evil into themselves. They now had to struggle. They now had to deal with their own internal impulses, what we call the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. And from then on, we're born with these evil impulses, and we got to struggle with them every day and more every hour for some of us. And Sforno, another of our commentators, had a different take on it. He explained that the tree of knowledge of good and bad can be read differently. It refers to all of our unwholesome capability or capacity to choose what seems to be good but isn't, and choose what seems, and not choose what seems to be bad but is. So what's good but isn't? You name your poison, basically. Excessive drinking, smoking, alcohol, whatever, drugs, excessive gambling, all of these are, they feel good, but they ain't good for you. On the other hand, it seems things that may feel bad, like hard work, study hard, as my wife would say, study, day up. That's a Confucianism turned into a Maoism. Going to bed early, getting a good night's sleep, eating well, all those things which don't taste so good or don't feel so good, that seem not to be so good, are really good for us. I'm belaboring the point. You shall surely die meant, according to Sforno, that man would become subject to death, not that death would follow immediately upon eating from the tree of knowledge, because what good would that have been? The first two people would be dead and would have to start all over again. So, that didn't mean that. It meant that death was now a factor in your life, which changes one's perspective totally. If you're immortal and don't ever think about the fact that you may no longer be here, you behave differently. So here we are with the constant struggle between good and evil impulses and the knowledge that we're not going to be here forever. So we got to make the best of what we've got while we can. And I don't mean the man with the most, or the person with the most toys. Who's the winner? The one who has the most toys before he dies? No. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about growth, internal development, that sort of thing, moving toward God. Applications for today. Well, they had all they needed, and pretty much we have all we needed too. It's what we want that's the problem. Eve knew what she should do, and so do we at most moral choice points. We know what we should do, but we don't always do it. Why is that? Eve chose to listen to the lies of the Satan and of Satan in the snake form, and believe that God was lying to her. We still listen to our Yetzer Hara when we've already made up our mind to do something, and we listen to our own internal impulses, our Yetzer Hara, to reinforce and to excuse that behavior. This resulted in a loss of innocence. Once we do something wrong, it's easy to do it again, and it's even easier to blame other people for your own mistakes. While they gain knowledge of good and evil, they now have to struggle with it every day. So the struggle still goes on. The problem is, or the bad things really begin to happen when we stop struggling, when we just give in. We just say, it ain't worth it. Let's just do what we want to do. It's not the case that we should have everything that we want. It is the case that we should begin to want everything that we have. We still have the same choice as Adam and Eve. We gain knowledge of evil by directly participating in it, or we can believe God and avoid those things. If it looks like a duck and it walks like a duck, it probably is. And if we know what things are good for us and what aren't. Okay, questions? Yes, Alicia.
I don't understand why he listened to the snake over God. I don't get the concept.
Because she probably had her mind made up ahead of time and needed some way to justify eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Any additions to it?
It seemed good to her.
Yeah.
That's the whole.
That was the point of saying something that looks good may not be good. And you need to really examine your own inner motives for wanting to do that.
It's very hard sometimes to set aside our own estimation of a situation and follow the estimation that God has tried to give us. We just would much rather usually rely on our own judgment, and that can be an issue.
I don't mean to be trite, but the concept of don't put beans in your ears is something I've never told my children. You don't want to entice them with the fact that they shouldn't be doing something. And I believe, as I read the story, that don't eat from that tree is the opportunity to say, well, maybe we're going to be missing something here.
Steve.
Okay, those are easy examples that you can infer that this is good and this is bad, but it's up to the individual to determine what knowledge is. There's a middle part where people are going to disagree and how to determine what is right and what is wrong in the middle.
Think about your Yeats or Tove. Think about what Jiminy Cricket says instead of the little devil. You got both of them. You just...
But reasonable people will disagree.
And that's the next part, which is to take what you've learned, take your wisdom, take your understanding, take your knowledge, and bring it to the table with other people who are doing the same in good faith. And that's why Judaism has always enshrined debate, discussion, and rational discourse as being essential, that no individual will ever know by themselves what is the right thing to do. It only comes from that collaborative effort. That's not self-correction, it's a group effort.
That's how the Mishnah came into being.
That's how everything in our past is.
Okay, for the liturgical example, I've selected Yigdal because it lets me talk a little bit about Rambam's 13 principles. What's a Jew believe? Rambam's 13 principles. Yigdal is a memory aid, early reactions and applications for today. So what do we believe? And it's hard to comprehend that we don't have dogma, that we don't have a catechism. The closest we come to something like that are the 13 principles, because Judaism is all about discussion, as you just pointed out, and argument and opinions and listening to God. But because of when Rambam was born, there was a whole lively discussion going on among the other religions about theology and their own dogma. And oftentimes we were asked in disputations and arguments to say in a nutshell, what do Jews believe? So the great codifier of Torah law and Jewish philosophy, Rambam, otherwise his real name is Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, or Maimonides. He has all these three names. He compiled and put together from Torah and Mishnah, from Torah, and put together in his commentary on the Mishnah Torah, Tractate Sanhedrin, chapter 10. So what does all this mean? The Rambam refers to these 13 principles as the fundamental beliefs of the Jewish people, and starts each one out with, I believe with perfect faith that God exists. And I'm not going to go into detail with these, because what Maimonides further said was it's easy to list these and hear them, but each one would require months and years of study to really understand it and to accept it and turn belief or faith into knowledge. God is one and unique. It's incorporeal, eternal. The prophets are true. Moses was the greatest of them. The written and oral Torah were given to Moses by God. There will be no other Torah. God knows all the thoughts and deeds of men. God will reward the good and punish the wicked. The Messiah will come and the dead will be resurrected. There's a lot here. I mean, one slide, okay? Nothing to it. I'll just take this slide and put it on a mirror and I'll look at it during the day, every day when I wake up. Nuh-uh. Each one of these topics requires years of study. So how do we how do we try to really remember these things? Well, this prayer is said in both Sephardic and Ashkenazic traditions. We recite it during the weekly morning prayers, and the prayer was believed to have been composed by Rav Daniel Bar Yehuda in the mid-14th century in Rome. And we needed it in order to continue to reinforce our knowledge of these principles and our beliefs, and to always have at our fingertips, virtual fingertips, an answer to the question of what do we believe. I'm going to not talk about the translation because you can read it from your Siddur, but basically, or the handout. But basically, it's each of the 13 principles expounded a little bit more. And is it a acrostic piyut? No, it's just a poem, basically. Early reactions, and some of these are interesting. In Rambam's time, Judaism no longer had a Sanhedrin, so there was no one to dogmatize these fundamental beliefs or fundamental knowledges. Therefore, there was a lot of controversy, as there is about a lot of Rambam's work. Rambam was trying to reduce all of Torah to 13 principles, and he didn't believe that anyone should try to minimize all of the divine truth of Torah. And others of his contemporaries for several centuries to follow didn't think about them at all. They didn't get wide publication at that time. We talked about Yigdal. Commentators during the 13th and 15th century narrowed the 13 principles down to 3 basic belief systems, if you will, or belief subsystems. Belief in God, belief in creation, and belief in providence, or, you get what you pay for. You get punished for bad things and rewarded for good things. On the other hand, David ben Yom Tov ibn Bilia, in his Yesodet HaMaskil, added 13 more, so there were now 26 at the same period. And I've read some of his, and I can't remember them, but they're interesting. They're really of value if you want to have a set of principles to live by. This gentleman, Jedediah Panini, in the last chapter of his book, enumerated no less than 35, so he added another 9. And then we come full circle, and Abarbanel, while defending Rambam, defending his honor, still he thought, he refused to accept the dogma for Judaism because he didn't think it was appropriate, again, because people should study all of the mitzvot. And as we have a book called Sefer HaChinuch, which goes through all of the 613 mitzvot for educational purposes. And he didn't want to see that reduced to one slide like I had up there. Eventually, Rambam's 13 Principles of Faith became the most widely accepted statement of Jewish faith as it is today, or Jewish belief. But this, I have to restate this again, but these are not beliefs that you just take on faith. These are beliefs that become true knowledge through intensive study, intensive discussion, and intensive insight, and using your insight and wisdom to transmute these statements into knowledge. That, I mean, you know this a priori by the time you finish the study. Yes, Steve?
So if you don't have the time and the lifestyle to study them, then what?
Study as much as you can. If you have 5 minutes a day, you should use a little bit of that 5 minutes to study some Torah.
Okay, but the way you could describe it is you study more, you're a better Jew. You study less, and you can imply that you're not as good a Jew.
No, I didn't say that. What I said was you know more. You know, you have a priori knowledge, deeper knowledge. That doesn't make you good or bad. It just makes you smarter, more knowledgeable.
Resourceful.
Resourceful, yeah. You study what's important to you. So for today, what Rambam's principles, while very basic in general, are still being disputed today. Judaism, as a rule, doesn't focus a whole lot on these philosophical concepts of the nature of God, the universe, the afterlife. Now, don't get me wrong, a lot of people spend a lot of time studying this, but it is not part of dogma. There are no dogmatic beliefs about these subjects. These are subjects for intense discussion and deep reading. Judaism focuses more on relationships and behaviors, relationships between God and mankind, between God and the Jewish people, between Jewish people in the land of Israel, and among all of the other Jewish people and among all human beings. How do we relate to everyone else? Torah tells of the development of these relationships and the mutual obligations that are imposed or implicit in those discussions of the development. And the denominations of Judaism as they exist today are kind of based on the disagreement about the nature of these obligations that are, I don't want to say imposed, that are implied in the Torah, that are stated in the Torah. Of course, Orthodox say they're absolute. Conservatives say we change with the times to some degree, but still maintaining within the borders of halakha. Reformed and Reconstructionists talk about them as guidelines for good behavior. Yes, sir?
Where does ethics?
I'm going to get to it. I think actually on the next.
I think that's more important than a lot of this.
Okay, but ethics come from the same place that all the rest of this comes from. So, thank you. The man is prescient. Yeah, you did that today in class. Thanks for the segue. Okay, our ethics are sprinkled throughout Torah and throughout Mishnah and throughout Talmud, but they were collected in this one section by the rabbis of the Mishnaic period called the Ethics of Our Fathers. This is highly useful knowledge, as you pointed out, from the Tanaim, appears in Tractate of Avot, the second to last tractate in Nezikin in the Mishnah. In case you want to look it up, that's reference citations. Pirkei Avot is the only tractate of the Mishnah dealing solely with ethical principles And there are few, if any, halacha or Jewish laws found in Perkei Avot. Chapter 4, Section 1, Ben Zoma, who is the rabbi who has been attributed with these sayings or teachings, uses his own chachma, bina, and da'at to teach us how to succeed in life. And if you want to succeed in life, here's all you got to do. Know who is wise. Who is wise? One who learns from others. Who's mighty? One who can control his own inner desires and motivations rather than try to control everyone else's over whom you have no control anyway. Who's wealthy? One who's happy with what he's got. Who's honored? The one who honors others. So we can go through these a little bit more detail. I think time will permit. Ben Zoma speaks first of wisdom rather than knowledge or intelligence or logic. For him, wisdom has a certain Western flavor. It's not the Kabbalistic definition. Wisdom's the application of these three with insight, patience, good judgment, perspective, and compassion. So he's saying wisdom is based on the application of knowledge to solve a problem, to solve an ethical dilemma. Many geniuses lack wisdom, as we may have come across in our time, in our experience and careers, and many of average intelligence possess wisdom to a high degree. You can be very knowledgeable and still be a fool. And search out the wise person and never let your own ego get in the way of learning from somebody else. So many of us do that. Sad. On the other hand, no one is totally useless. He can always serve as a bad example. Ben Zoma didn't say that. So it is possible even to learn from someone who is a fool. So who's mighty? Ben Zoma says it's not the one who can control others. As I said, you have no control over anybody else or any people, places, or things. The only thing you have control over, truly, in reality, in deep knowledge, is your own behavior now. You can't control the past, you can't control the future, and you can't control anybody else. I mean, you can suppress someone's behavior or repress someone's behavior with putting a gun to his head, but you don't really have control. The assertiveness, I love this part, and persistence of our ego produce a force of almost limitless power, for good or bad. Empires have been built and families shattered by the Yetzer Hara's passion. The truly mighty are the ones who can moderate these impulses and direct them toward something that's good. Good for you and good for everyone else. The constant battle between the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara, whose characteristics are anger, jealousy, pride, lust, pettiness, is the proving ground for true power. This is where you learn to be powerful and mighty, is through the struggle, according to Ben Zoma. Who's wealthy? He who's happy with his portion. So how do you achieve this? You use wisdom and insight to know the value of what you have, to know what happiness really means. And I was really impressed with this. Well, because Ben Zoma is a very insightful guy. Don't pursue happiness per se, okay? The concept, the Jeffersonian concept of the pursuit of happiness that's enshrined in Declaration of Independence it's interesting, but you can't pursue happiness because happiness is a state. Happiness really is a function of the effort you put in to pursuing your goals for yourself and for your society, for your family, for your group, for the United States, for the world, for Israel, whatever those goals happen to be. Tangible goals and objectives that have a definable not always at the end, as you move toward a goal, you will find it, you're getting happier and happier. If you pursue, you have happiness. Is it having a yacht? Is it going to the movies 3 times a week? I don't know. But it's fleeting. It doesn't last. What lasts is accomplishment. Try into having. You can't just have something because you want it. That's another thing I used to say a lot. Start each day with gratitude for the most basic gift, life itself. And we have a little prayer that we say every morning when we wake up. It's called Modeh Ani. Modeh Ani lefanecha melech chai v'chayim shechazarta bi nishmati v'hemla rabba amunatecha. I offer thanks before you, living and eternal God, for you have mercifully restored my soul within me. Your faithfulness is great. I'm awake again. Still sitting up, taking nourishment. And this is my chance today to accomplish something. So we say thanks for that. Who's honored? We all want to be appreciated. Often our perceptions of ourselves are a little bit distorted, mostly to the positive. Others may not accord us the honor that we think we deserve. Moreover, we mistakenly assume that wealth, fame, power are the attributes of honor, that if I have all these things, then I'm an honorable person. Maybe, maybe not, but it's not per se. It's not quid pro quo. Ultimately, it's our honest recognition of our own value, humility, know who you are, and our deeds that is our greatest reward in this world. As we were saying, the accomplishment of goal-oriented behavior is a reward in and of itself. It literally makes you happy. And God's recognition of our deeds and who we are determines our reward in the world to come. Even in comparative psychological studies with rats and monkeys and stuff like that, there's something called the fractionated and anticipatory fractionated goal response. So when you put a little rat in a maze and it's running through the maze, the rat's behavior gets more animated as it gets closer to the sugar water or whatever it is that's the objective. And that has been physiologically measured. And we know that his behavior is more directed, quicker, faster, and he looks happier because he's getting closer to what he wants. We're a lot different. Our goals are different. We don't just want sugar water. But even in the animal kingdom, these same things are apparent. It's far better than seeking honor for yourself is to honor others, particularly those whose virtuous deeds go overlooked. Who was it? One of our sages said, stay away from, I don't know, maybe you can help me with this, stay away from politics or don't seek office or something like that. Because by definition, anyone who seeks office should be denied having it. It's kind of like that, just accruing honor for yourself. It's almost like the Chumrah of the Month Club, taking on additional restringencies is looked at as spiritual materialism by others. And it's the idea that you're doing more than is required for the purpose of being more honorable than other people. Well, others accord you honor. You cannot honor yourself. You cannot accord yourself honor. So if you honor others and give them kavod, honor, it will come back to you. Every person has Tselem Elohim, is created in the image of God, and therefore is inalienably due a certain amount of respect. Not a certain amount, is due respect. Some more than others, but that's the way it is. But there's a requirement to honor people in that statement. The one whose first thought is for the honor of others will will attract notice and gain honor for himself, both in this world and in the next. Thus, Benzoma teaches one who's wise enough to learn from others, to see beyond the superficial attraction of wealth, power, etc. One who strives toward the development of his internal self rather than his external persona, is the one who will acquire inner peace. That is the ultimate source of incomparable wealth, genuine honor, and true happiness. Questions? Kind of a mishmash.
The whole thing is questions.
What's your question?
What I have a problem with, I was maybe aware but rejected the idea of a world to come. Because that to me is too close to Islam and Christianity. What you do on this earth is not important, it's what's in the world to come. I don't buy it.
No, that's on the contrary. It's what you do in this world that makes your place in the world to come. You don't do, once,
Therefore, you have to accept that there is a heaven or a hell. I didn't think
there is
Judaism accepted heaven and hell.
There is a world to come, according to Jewish theology and thinking, yes.
That's when the dead will arrive.
No, that's, Rabbi, sorry, go ahead.
We might want to save this for another time when we have a full discussion about the afterlife in Jewish views. But because it's more complicated than we have as a small answer between slides. But you're asking all the right questions, and it's important to realize that the answers are going to be substantially different than we do hear from other religions. Even if we use many of the same English words, even if we talk about afterlife, even if we talk about maybe heaven or punishment or reward, you have to shed the other distortions of what we make. And that's very tricky to do in 2 minutes. So
Okay.
let's save that for another time.
Yes, sir.
If I can figure out how to do it.
Before we do that, when you say save it for another time, Rabbi, is it on the agenda for classes or set?
I don't believe that the World to Come is built into the
No.
curriculum for the
No.
Boundless Judaism.
But that would be
If
a,
there is interest, I'm willing to do a class on any topic. So
well, let's,
I know that we have at least 3 people in the room who would like more detail on this. I'd be happy to find a time with my adult education chair
Yeah.
to put something together.
maybe a nutshell start with a half hour.
Maybe we've done one with a nutshell. I've done a nutshell before on eschatology before, but it might need a little more time and maybe even with the PowerPoint, there's a few things that can be done to help explain it a bit more. Because the timeline of what Judaism believes of eternity is confusing compared to the cartoon version most of us have been taught from pop culture and the media. So yeah, it's not easy to get a handle on.
I talked to it today, and you can add one more balance.
Okay. Well, it's Boundless. We can keep going.
See, where do you want me to go back?
Oh, that, no, I'm sorry, you were there. If you read that, that sounds, you should all just sit around and philosophize and work on yourself. I mean, we should all turn into Buddhist monks or something. And yet that's not how Jews live their lives. They're capitalists and, you know.
You want to hear something funny? This is cognitive psychology. When you go for cognitive behavioral therapy, this is what you'll be doing. Not you, but when one goes.
But I think, that's one of the reasons why we're doing the different segments of this, of each topic, is that Judaism is made up of 1,000 different fragments and different pieces, which aren't fragments, but are really reflecting the same whole. So this is not the end-all and be-all of Judaism. But also, if you leave this out, then you're also missing out on a major part of Judaism. So certainly Judaism believes that with this, you go out into the world and you live that shining life. You don't sit in the monastery and meditate all day. But on the other hand, you don't go out and try to live a life without properly equipping yourself in spiritual depth.
This is for the Mohammed.
Well, this is for all of us. Now, we all may succeed or be able to aspire to different levels, or have different amounts of time or ability, but none of these relate.
Enlightenment. We'll talk about is it? Does it relate to that about? So I'm not going to go over this in any detail. We can all read about the Age of Enlightenment from about 1650 to 1780. Culture and intellect finally took hold again in Western Europe after the Middle Ages, with an emphasis on reason, analysis, and individualism rather than authority. Actually, some of rulers, monarchs, and church people actually talked to some of the scholars and intellectuals of the time. New ideas and beliefs were spread also by an increase in literacy and non-religious publication non-religious texts. Transforming publications are these three. And important names are etched in memory of great scientists: Francis Bacon, Descartes, John Locke, philosophers, Spinoza, Isaac Newton, Hume, and Immanuel Kant. These were all folks who inspired the European Enlightenment, and also indirectly inspired the Jewish Enlightenment, which followed on the heels of the European Enlightenment. Haskalah, from the Hebrew sechel, which means reason or intellect, was based on rationality. This was a major departure from the way things were handled before that. Everything was argument by authority. Now we're going to introduce the principles of scientific investigation as they were then and have grown since.
Reintroduced, I'd like to say.
What, reintroduced, yes. Yeah, that's what the Enlightenment is all about. We come out of the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages and rediscover all the things we knew before and then start building again. It advocated Enlightenment values, and having a Jewish character, argued for integration into European society, strong support for education in secular studies, Hebrew language, and Jewish history. Prior to this, everything was about Talmud and Torah, which isn't a bad thing. It just didn't prepare Jews for being integrated into European society. It encouraged us to enter the crafts, the arts, the sciences, and even farming. And the followers of the Haskalah or the Maskilim tried to assimilate, as we said, into European society, not only through the things they learned, but through their dress, their language, their manners, and the loyalty to the ruling power. An interesting example is Hasidim, who dress in these long coats and beaver hats and funny looking shoes and all that sort of thing, were really emulating the Polish monarchy, the Polish nobility's dress style at the time, the secular nobility. So I think that's ironic, if you will. And furthermore, the Haskalah drove the division of Ashkenazic Jewry into the denominations that we have today. Before then, there were no Orthodox Jews because there was no need to be. Everyone was a Jew. You practiced as much as you could. If you were a milkman like Tevye, you didn't have time to sit in the yeshiva every day and study and contemplate your navel and all that sort of thing. But you studied as much as you could. They didn't divide who Jews were. You know, you either were learned or you weren't so learned or whatever. You know, there was a continuum. And then with the Haskalah came the idea of reform movement, which was total, like 180 degrees out from what people believe today, maybe 170, but what believed at the time. And they wanted integration, they wanted secular studies, they wanted to take off their yarmulkes, they wanted to have an organ, and just like the Christian churches. So anyway, so it drove the movements or denominations, especially in North America and other English-speaking countries. Moses Mendelssohn was known as the father of the Haskalah. He was a great philosopher. He was protected by Frederick the Great. He won a prize from the Prussian Academy. And he presented Judaism as a non-dogmatic, rational faith that is open to modernity and change. He was a champion for the Reform movement, I guess you could say. He called for secular education, and he initiated translation of the Torah into German with Hebrew letters, which became Yiddish. No, there was already Yiddish then?
It was to help people who knew Yiddish do proper German.
Okay, got it. So how does this relate to Dodd? Probably already alluded to that. The biggest changes due to the Haskalah were in Jewish education. They tried to remove Talmudic knowledge as the central column or pillar of Jewish education. They wanted to include Jewish studies curriculum that emphasized secular knowledge. They advocated study of Jewish history and ancient Hebrew as a way to revive national Jewish consciousness, and they wanted to train Jewish children in common sense, tolerance, and reasonableness, which they didn't see among their peers at the time. Reactions, as you might guess, many were opposed because it went against traditional Judaism and challenged both rabbinic authority and the role of Talmud. Nevertheless, it influenced even traditional Jews. One of the first Orthodox schools that taught a dual curriculum, which is what we have now in our day schools, were in Germany. And in Russia, the Haskalah views that could be seen as coming from the Haskalah were championed by Elijah ben Shlomo Zalman, known as the Vilna Gaon of all people, who was a great Talmudic scholar. But he thought also that secular studies were important. And today, in most of Western Europe, the Haskalah ended up with large numbers of Jews assimilating. This was what was feared by the people who, Misnagdim, is that who they are? The ones who were opposed to the Maskilim. They were the original, the Jews of the time before the Haskalah. They said, if you do this, you're going to lose, and Jews are going to assimilate. Well, yeah, they did. Stopped adhering to halacha, a lot of them, not all. The struggle for emancipation in Germany awakened some doubts about the future of Jews and led to immigration and Zionism. Russia anti-Semitism was what ended the Haskalah. The Jews can't seem to win. If you try to be separate, you're viewed as clannish and you only want to be in your own group. If you try to assimilate, you're viewed as trying to horn in and take the jobs of Christians. So, you can't win because anti-Semitism is not rational, it's not because of what you do, it's hatred for who you are. The Haskalah created the first Hebrew literature and also the first secular Yiddish literature. It spawned the Jewish press, and it became the system of secular and Judaic dual curriculum education that we have in our day schools even today. So, how are we doing? Oh, good. Since we started at 10 after, we'll end at 10 after. The calendar. This is the last example of knowledge, and it is Simchat Torah, which in my view is the celebration of knowledge. What is it? When is it? And how does it relate to Dot? I call it the celebration of knowledge in circles. What is Simchat Torah? Simchat Torah. Rejoicing in the Torah. The holiday marks the end of the current cycle of public reading of the Torah and the beginning of the next. We read the last chapter of the Torah portion, proceed immediately to the first chapter. We march in circular processions around the synagogue carrying Torahs and flags and whatever else, fake, little teddy bear Torahs. Kids carry those. Lots of singing and dancing in circles. So what is all this business with circles? We have a cyclical, circular reading of the Torah in public, and we dance around, and so we do hakafot, circles, during Sukkot, and then we end it all up with the grand circles of the hakafot during Simchat Torah. Circles reinforce the cycle of public Torah readings, and they help translate I into we. When you get into those circles and you really let yourself go and you don't step out of yourself and say, God, this is stupid. Do I really want to do this? Jumping, dancing around. If you let yourself go, and almost every culture has circular dances where people dance around a campfire or dance around Native American dances around drums and whirling dervishes. A lot of people, a lot of cultures spin themselves around to alter their consciousness. I won't say we go that far, but I've seen some pretty wild Simchat Torah celebrations. Have a little mashka and, a little schnapps here and there. And it gets pretty wild. And why do we do that? We do it to lose ourselves for a few minutes and to rejoice in the circle of we, of us, of our tradition. As many people as possible are given the honor of an aliyah on Simchat Torah, and we try to give everyone an honor, not just as many as possible. Everyone gets called to the Torah to do a bracha. Also, as many people as possible get to dance with the Torah, and we don't have any problem with that because there's not usually very many people, so everybody gets multiple turns. And it's a time for confirmation ceremonies or ceremonies marking the beginning